He rode alone across the Mojave, a man with more money than God, and a heart burned to ash. But when he found a pregnant widow collapsed in the dust, whispering a name that wasn't his, everything changed. What started as a rescue became something no one, not even he, could have imagined. Stay with us to the end. Because their love didn't justify the desert. It made history. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe that even the loneliest heart can find its way. The Mojave sun doesn't rise, it scorches. By the time morning hits full bloom, the sand glows like burning copper, and the wind carries more grit than mercy. Most men wouldn't ride under it. Most men had enough sense to wait for dusk. Dawn. Gideon Blackwell isn't most men. He rides alone across the basin, hat brim low, a silk bandana pulled tight across his mouth. His stallion, a roan named Omen, pushes through the dust without hesitation, as if he knows the rhythm of solitude. There's no trail beneath them, just instinct and memory and a worn compass needle swinging lazily. South-east. In his saddlebag, deeds, contracts, and a flask of Kentucky Rye. In his heart, nothing. It's been 7 years since the fire, since the night lightning split the sky above Blackwell Ranch, and the house went up like paper. His wife, Evelyn, had been upstairs, heavy with child. He tried to reach her. God knows he tried. But the smoke choked faster than his boots could climb. The baby never drew breath. Neither did she. Not after that night. And Gideon hasn't spoken her name since. He built an empire instead. Cattle first, then freight, then silver from the mines. Outside Carson, he bought the rail company that once refused him a seat. Acquired land he'd never see. Built towns with money and lawyers in silence. Folks called him Blackwell the Builder. But never to his face, not anymore. The man they remember wore color. This one wears grief like armor. And still he rides. It's late morning when the horizon shifts. At first, Gideon thinks it's a mirage. Heat plays tricks and the Mojave makes sagebrush look like angels. A broken post like a cross. But the shape doesn't flicker. It slumps, moves slightly, like something struggling to hold on. Gideon reins an Omen. He lifts the goggles. From his eyes, there, near the skeletal ruin of an old way station, a collapsed shelter, and the remnants of a stone well, dried to chalk, and beside it a woman. She sprawled in the dust, one arm stretched toward the well as if she crawled there and gave up. Her dress, once pale blue, is torn and caked with grit. A bonnet clings to her head by one stubborn ribbon, and beneath it, tufts of hair the color of autumn wheat spill across her shoulders. A mule lies beside her. Our IBS exposed, foam at its lips, dead or dying. Either way, useless now. Gideon's first instinct is caution. He's seen decoys before, bandits faking injury, waiting for a soft-hearted traveler. But this ain't that. There's no rustle of movement, no shadows in the rocks, just the wind, the sand, and the faintest sound a cry. Not hers. Higher, thin as glass. A baby. Gideon swings off the saddle. His boots hit the ground like thunder. She stirs, barely. When he kneels beside her, her eyes flutter open, blue, cracked with red veins. Not quite seeing him. Water, she whispers. He uncorks the canteen and tilts it gently against her lips. She drinks like a creature risen from the grave, coughing between gulps. Her hands tremble as they press against her swollen belly. Please, the baby. He looks closer. She's in the late stages. Maybe days from labor. Maybe hours. He glances. Again at the collapsed shelter, then to the horizon. They are at least 20 miles from the nearest telegraph post. 30 from a town. No doctor. No midwife. No hope unless they move. What's your name? Gideon asks. Her lips shape it slowly. Maybelle. Then she goes limp. Gideon doesn't hesitate. He lifts her into the saddle, cradling her as best he can with one arm while gripping the reins in the other. She's light to light. Every bone feels like a question. Her skin is hot, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird's. The crying comes again softer, muffled. He finds the source tucked beneath her shawl, a bundle swaddled in threadbare cloth. Not a newborn, but no more than a month old. Gideon presses his hand gently to the infant's chest. It rises, just barely. Damn it, he mutters, adjusting the child into his vest for warmth. And then they ride. The sun climbs higher, dragging heat with it. Gideon's hat does little now. His back slicks with sweat. The desert blurs into one endless scream of sand and silence. But he doesn't stop. Not when Maybelle groans in her sleep. Not when the baby coughs, dry and thin. Hours pass. By the time the outpost rises ahead, an old telegraph station made of sagging beams and a tin roof half peeled by storms. Gideon is barely holding the reins. His vision is red, his lips blistered. But he kicks Omen one last time. The door creaks open to a man named Elijah Ward, the station master. Who hasn't seen another soul in for days? What in God's name? Water, towels, whiskey if you've got it, and a damn clean blanket. He doesn't wait for a response, just carries her inside. Elijah fetches what he can, and the next hour is a blur. Gideon tends to the baby first, cleans its mouth with damp cloth, feeds it sugar water from a spoon. The infant cries weakly, then suckles Gideon's gloved finger. The sound thin, desperate, alive, breaks something inside him. He closes his eyes. Hears another baby's cry, far away in memory, then a scream, then silence. He opens them again. Maybelle stirs. Her voice is rough as gravel. Where? Safe, Gideon says. You're safe. She starts to sit up, winces, cradles her belly. The baby's fine. You're fine. You're not alone anymore. Tears track silently from her eyes. She doesn't ask his name, not yet. She just whispers, "Thank you." He nods. And for the first time in years, Gideon Blackwell feels the weight of something heavier than grief. Hope. Maybelle sleeps for 14 hours straight. The dessert has a way of draining what the soul doesn't realize it's still holding. And Gideon figures she's been holding on longer than anyone should. He keeps the kerosene lamp low through the night, rising now and again to check on her, once when she moaned in her sleep, once when the baby cried, once when the wind slammed a shutter so hard it cracked the frame. The old telegraph outpost groans with each gust, built by the Pacific Express Company back in '72. It's half rotted and long forgotten. Elijah Ward still keeps the key and the wire, but trains haven't passed through in 3 months. And mail's even less reliable. Still, there's a stove, clean water, and enough tin peaches to get through the next 2 days. That'll have to do. Gideon sleeps in a corner, hat over his face, boots on, one hand on the grip of his revolver. When he wakes to birdsong and soft crying, it takes him a second to remember he's not alone. Maybelle is sitting upright, pale as a sheet but awake. The baby is pressed to her chest, feeding weakly. She hums something under her breath, just enough melody to calm the child, and then looks over at him. Unsure, Gideon rises, dusts himself off. "You're alive," he says flatly. She nods. Her voice is hoarse. "Thanks to you." "No," he says, crossing to the stove. "Thanks to dumb luck. If I'd passed by 20 minutes later, I'd be burying you." She looks down at the baby. "I don't even know your name." Gideon Blackwell. Her eyes flicker. She's heard the name. Everybody has. "You're the rancher? The one from Silver Ridge, among other things. And you saved me." There's a faint bitterness to it. Not distrust, just disbelief. "I stopped. You weren't exactly hard to miss." Silence hangs between them, filled only by the crackle of fire and the baby's breathing. Then she speaks, slower this time. "My husband's name was Clancy Mercer. He was a miner out of Oman. We got married 2 years ago. When the mine collapsed, they found his helmet, not him. I waited 3 days by the shaft before they gave up." Gideon listens without interrupting. "His family didn't want me after that," she continues. "Said I brought bad luck. When I told them I was pregnant, they left me at a stagecoach depot with $50 and a bag of flour. I traded it for a mule and tried to cross the desert myself." Gideon stares at her. "That's suicide. I figured that out halfway through." She touches the baby's cheek. "But she didn't deserve to die just because I was born unlucky." He watches her for a long moment. "She have a name?" Maybelle shakes her head. "I thought maybe I'd know when I saw her. But I still don't. Maybe I was waiting for someone to say it first." Gideon walks over to the window. The sun's crawling up the sky, red and unforgiving. He doesn't speak for a minute. Then, "How about Clara?" Maybelle tilts her head. "That was my mother's name," he adds, not turning around. "She died young too." The name settles in the room like dust. "Clara." The baby stirs, soft as a sigh. Maybelle whispers it, "Clara," and something in her posture eases, like she's finally touched ground after drifting too long in a windstorm. They stay at the outpost 3 more days. Elijah Ward, ever polite and vaguely startled by everything, gives them space. The telegraph line remains dead, but he offers them his bunk and a spare rocking chair for Maybelle. Gideon sets up a cot near the stove and checks the mule's body once each morning to keep the coyotes off. The days pass slow, hot, dry, filled with more silence than talk. But things shift. Maybelle begins walking again, one hand on the wall to steady herself. She boils water, sings lullabies to Clara that sound older than scripture. On the second night, she finds Gideon mending a broken bridle and offers to help. "I used to sew boots," she says, threading a needle with worn fingers. "Clancy liked nice boots." Gideon grunts, but he doesn't stop her. They sit together. In the lamp glow, not quite talking, not quite silent. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. When she finishes stitching, he tests the leather's give. Good work, he says. Maybelle smiles for the first time. It's a small smile, but it sticks. On the fourth morning, Gideon steps outside before dawn and stares at the empty horizon. He could leave. He could leave today, right east like he planned. Check on the rail survey and be in Tucson by Friday. The woman would be safe. Here Elijah could wire for a stage, send her north. Plenty of folks would take her in. Now that she had a baby and a name to go with it. That was the plan. No attachments, no detours, no ghost. But then he hears laughter. Maybelle inside, bouncing Clara gently on her knee. The baby lets out a squeal so pure it cuts straight through the dawn wind. For a second, Gideon forgets where he is. He forgets. He's the richest man west of the Rockies, forgets the fire, the empty rooms, the long years of building walls so high even God couldn't peek over them. He thinks about staying. It terrifies him. Later that day, he sits with Maybelle on the porch. I'll take you to Barton Springs, he says. Town's big enough for a doctor. Safer than this place. She hesitates. What about you? He chews on the question like jerky. Haven't decided yet. Maybelle looks at him, eyes steady. You came out here for business, didn't you? Real investment. And now, he shrugs. Doesn't seem so urgent anymore. She says nothing. Just rocks Clara gently, eyes scanning the sand as if the answer might rise out of it. You ever think about what you'd do if you had a second chance? She finally asks. Gideon takes a long breath. I used to. And now? I don't know if I deserve one. Maybelle doesn't reply, but she reaches out and places her hand gently on his. It stays there until the sun begins to set. The sun is still nothing more than a thin red bruise on the eastern rim of the Mojave. When Gideon saddles Omen and fits a worn side saddle for Maybelle, he works in practiced silence, testing each cinch twice, checking the water skins, weighing every choice the way a poker player weighs chips before that final raise. A single misstep out here, one frayed strap, one forgotten canteen, and the desert writes its own obituary. Inside the telegraph shack, Maybelle bundles Clara in Elijah Ward's thickest wool blanket. The bundle makes her look smaller, younger, like a girl playing at motherhood instead of a widow who has already buried a husband. But her eyes have flint in them now. 3 days of rest and steady water have put color back in her cheeks, and a spark behind her questions. Gideon catches that spark each time she studies him, the faint incredulity that a man as stone-faced as Gideon Blackwell might still be capable of mercy. They ride out just after dawn, with Elijah waving from the porch, telegraph key clacking a farewell nobody on the line will hear. The shack shrinks behind them until it becomes a dark tooth in the endless yellow. Ahead lies 40 miles of ragged country before Barton Springs, Kalish Flats. That shimmer like boiling mirrors, dry waters that snap and trickle with mirage, and ridges of basalt where the heat climbs invisible ropes. Maybelle grips the pommel. Gideon keeps one gloved hand near her thigh, steady in the saddle each time Omen lurches over uneven ground. He tells himself it's practical, she's still weak. Clara's weight pulls her off balance, but it feels like something older than practicality, as though the gesture were carved into him long before the fire ever took Evelyn. When the sun burns straight overhead, they stop beneath the only shade for miles. A lone Joshua tree crouched like a watchman in prayer. Gideon spreads a canvas between two broken branches. Maybelle sits cross-legged beneath it, nursing Clara while wind hisses through the needles above. Gideon hands her a strip of jerky and a tin cup of lukewarm water. She thanks him, voice quiet, and tears a soft bite for the baby's dry lips before taking any for herself. Clancy used to call midday the devil's breath, she says, almost smiling. Said you could fry an egg on the mule's back. Gideon grunts. You can? I've done it. She laughs, really laughs, and the sound startles even Clara, who blinks up from the blanket. The breeze lifts Mabel's hair, and for a heartbeat Gideon sees her not as a dessert cast-off, but as a woman who might yet dance in a lamplit parlor, laugh at a bad joke, sing to a child beneath a safe roof. What about you? She asks after a moment. What did you call this hour before all this? Gideon shrugs. Didn't call it anything. Back then, I was too busy counting ledger lines. His voice thins. And after, I stopped naming things. Maybelle traces a thumb along Clara's cheek. Maybe it's time you started again. The words are so gentle they sting. Gideon rises, pretending to check Omen's girth. He can feel Mabel's gaze on his back, steady as sunrise. They push on. By late afternoon, the land begins to tilt upward. A long broken staircase of ochre stone leading to a mesa where vultures wheel in lazy circles. Heat ribbons turn every horizon into a shaking veil. Maybelle clutches Gideon's coat, collar, forehead against his spine, whispering lullabies whenever Clara's cries grow thin from the jostle. Gideon counts each mile aloud, an old cattle drive habit, because the rhythm comforts the baby and, though he won't admit it, steadies his own thoughts. At dusk they descend into a dry creek bed choked with ironwood and mesquite. Somewhere ahead a spring trickles beneath layered shale. Gideon hears it before he sees it. The faint clink of water against stone like spurs in an empty saloon. He swings down, scoops the first clear handful, and tastes dust mixed with something impossibly sweet, life in its rawest measure. They camp there. No fire to dry, to risky, but the rocks still hold the day's warmth. Gideon unrolls his coat as a mattress, gives Maybelle the only blanket he owns besides Omen's thin saddle pad. She tries to protest, but he silences it with a look forged in years of command. She folds the blanket around Clara and herself, leans back against the roots of a mesquite, and for a long while neither of them speaks. Crickets start up in the shadows. Coyotes yap distances away, as if arguing over the moon. Finally Maybelle whispers, "Do you ever think about leaving it all? The ranches, the rail, the money?" Gideon stares into the dark. "More than I admit. So why don't you?" His jaw works. "Because the minute I stop moving, the silence remembers my name." Maybelle nods as though she understands something most people miss. She traces circles on Clara's back. "Silence remembered me the day the shaft fell. I tried to fill it with prayers, but it echoed louder." She looks up. The silence. "Here with you," she hesitates. "It's different. It isn't empty. It's patient." The words make Gideon feel suddenly unseated, like the ground is shifted under him. He looks away, scanning the canyon rim for threats that aren't there. Maybelle continues, softer. "Maybe that's what second chances sound like, silence that waits instead of swallows." Clara fusses, and Maybelle hums a verse Gideon doesn't recognize. The melody drifts over the creek bed, tangles in the brittle leaves, settles in Gideon's chest like a seed. He lies awake long after mother and child have fallen asleep, counting stars until the sky pales and the desert exhales its nightly sigh of cool air. For the first time in 7 years, he doesn't dream of flames. Morning brings trouble. They're less than 10 miles from Barton Springs when they round a sandstone spur and walk straight into a knot of men on horseback, for riders, dust masked, rifles across their saddles. Gideon's hand goes to his Colt before thought catches up, but Mabel's gasp freezes him. Clara wails at the sudden tension. The lead rider nudges his horse closer. His eyes glean Gideon's fine tack and Mabel's blanket-trapped bundle. "Mighty rough road for a pleasure ride, friend." Gideon's voice is flat steel, just passing through. "A man with a woman that far along ought to have a wagon." The rider's gaze narrows. "Unless he stole her." Gideon's fingers flex over the grip. "You're about to make the worst mistake of your life." Another rider laughs, spitting shaw. "Hear that, boys? Moneybags thinks he can scare us." Gideon clocks their gear. Patch boots, mismatched tack, no brand on the horse's desert. Skinners who prey on lone travelers. He also notes their saddle scabbards hold older Springfield rifle single shot. He could draw twice before they lever once, but Maybelle lays a hand on his arm. "Please," she whispers, not with the baby. The plea yanks him back from the brink. Not because he fears dying, but because he suddenly fears leaving them alone. In a canyon of scavengers. He lifts both palms, slow. "We don't want trouble." The lead rider grins beneath his kerchief. "Trouble's already here. Hand over the horse, your canteens, and that silver watch I see glinting at your vest. The lady can keep the blanket. You can have the watch." Gideon's tone makes the rider blink. "But the horse and the woman stay with me." For a heartbeat the canyon holds its breath. Then the rider swings his rifle down. Gideon moves faster. One smooth draughty shots that echo off sandstone like rolling thunder. The lead rider's rifle shatters, his horse rears. The second round slices the bandit's hat brim, carving a neat, smoking crescent. The man screams, tumbling backward. The others scramble in panic, yanking reins, firing wild. Gideon wheels. Omen half-circle, shielding Maybelle, firing once more into the air, pure intimidation. Dust clouds swirl, horses bolt, and within seconds the canyon empties, leaving only the smell of powder and fear. Maybelle is shaking, arms wrapped around Clara. Gideon holsters the Colt, breath ragged, jaw clenched so tight it aches. He cups her cheek gently. "You're hurt." She shakes her head, wide-eyed. "I've never seen anyone move that fast." He wants to say it wasn't speed that saved them, just years of loneliness sharpened into reflex. But the words lodge like grit. Instead he murmurs, "We ride on." They reach Barton Springs by late afternoon, some leached buildings crouched around a ribbon of real water and cottonwoods. Townsfolk pause as Gideon leads Maybelle through the main street, mothers herding children. miners with dust-gray faces, a preacher who tips his hat first at the woman then at the scarred man by her side. They see wealth in Gideon's boots and sorrow in his eyes. They see exhaustion in Mabel's gait and fierce resolve in the way she holds her child. At the doctor's house, Gideon lifts Mabel from the saddle as though she weighs no more than a feather. Dr. Silas, Rennie, white-haired, spectacles fogged, ushers them in, fussing about hydration and prenatal rest. Clara earns a cooing nurse and a clean cradle lined with soft muslin. Mabel sinks onto crisp sheets, closing her eyes in relief as Gideon answers questions on her behalf. Days without water, hours in the saddle, a confrontation with bandits. Rennie raises his brows at that last bit but says nothing. In the Mojave, stories of gun smoke drift through doors the way heat drifts through cracks. When examination is done, the doctor steps onto the porch with Gideon. She'll need at least 2 weeks of rest, he says. Nutrition, quiet, and honest kindness. I'll see to it, Gideon replies. Rennie eyes him over the rim of his spectacles. You look like a man who hasn't stayed in one place for a long while, Mr. Blackwell. Gideon's gaze drifts to the window where Mabel sleeps, Clara curled against her breast. Maybe that's about to change. The doctor nods, as though he's heard a verdict passed. There's a boarding house down the lane. Tell Mrs. Hartley I sent you. And Mr. Blackwell, if you intend to protect them, remember sometimes a tender word shields better than a gun. Gideon almost smiles. I'll try. That evening the boarding house parlor smells of lavender soap and simmering elk stew. Rocking chairs creak, lamps glow amber, and rain miraculous, unseasonal begins tapping the shingles. Gideon sits in a corner armchair, boots off, back aching in ways he hasn't felt since youth. Mabel, in a fresh calico gown, crosses the room carrying Clara. She settles on the sofa opposite him. Outside, thunder rumbles. Inside, something gentler stirs, the slow dawning realization that this, too, can be silence, the patient kind she spoke of, the second chance kind. Gideon meets her gaze across lamplight, and neither of them looks away. The desert feels 1,000 miles behind them, and yet its crucible heat still binds their fates. Like glass fused by flame, Gideon doesn't know what tomorrow's ledger will read, what empire might topple if he stays. He only knows the arithmetic of the moment. One weary widow, one new life, and one man who no longer believes his heart deserves to burn alone. Outside, the first real rain in months begins to fall, turning dust into the smell of promise. Asterisk. The boarding house smells like bread in the mornings. Not just any bread, yeast bread. The kind that rises overnight and gets brushed with butter so thick it glistens like gold. When it hits the plate, Mabel wakes to that smell her first morning. And Barton springs, and for a moment, she forgets where she is. The soft tick of a mantel clock, the warmth of flannel sheets, the hush of rain outside, none of it matches the memory of desert wind and mule-bone silence. Then, Clara shifts against her breast, and it all comes rushing back. She sits up slowly, wincing. Her muscles ache in places she didn't know existed. But Clara is breathing easy, curled like a kitten beneath the blankets, safe, fed, warm. The world has shrunk down to something that almost feels manageable. There's a knock. She startles, but it's just Gideon's voice, low and gentle. There's breakfast downstairs. You're not expected to do anything but rest. Mabel blinks at the door, surprised by how much she wants to hear that voice again. She dresses slowly in the calico gown Mrs. Hartley left on the chair and wraps Clara close. Downstairs, the parlor is a patchwork of creaking wood, lace doilies, and hand-worn hymnals. Gideon stands near the window in a clean shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He's pouring black coffee into a cup that looks comically small in his hand. He turns at the sound of her steps. You look. He trails off, unsure how to finish. Alive, she offers with a tired smile. He nods. That'll do. Mrs. Hartley, a robust woman with the firm presence of a general, and the soft voice of a chapel bell, ushers her to the table. Plates appear. Bread, jam, boiled eggs, stewed apples. Gideon eats in silence, but not distance. He watches Clara with that same unreadable look he's worn since the dessert, as if he's still deciding whether he believes any of this is real. Mabel doesn't try to break the silence. She lets it wrap around them, warm and wide, like the quilt on her bed. And something begins to settle. Each day follows a quiet rhythm. Gideon rises early, leaves before breakfast to check in on the local telegraph agent, the land office, the railroad, ledger. Barton Springs may be small, but it sits at the edge of a new vein of opportunity. And Gideon has always had a sixth sense for where money grows next. He comes back by noon with his coat dusted and rode, and his eyes always searching for her the moment he crosses the boarding house threshold. Some days they eat lunch together. Some days he just nods, tired, and heads upstairs for an hour's sleep before evening falls. Maybelle begins to feel her strength return. Slowly, she walks Clara through the side garden in the afternoons, letting the infant nap in a patch of soft sun while she brushes her own hair out beneath the cottonwoods. She speaks more now to Mrs. Hartley, to the shopkeeper's wife, to the widow next door who once worked as a nurse and now teaches her to bathe Clara in a porcelain bowl. Still, it's with Gideon that her words feel most like home. They talk more at night. In the parlor, over soup, sometimes none at all, but the space between them softens, grows. One evening, he brings her a package wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a leather cord. Inside is a children's book, Prairie Fables and Wildflower Tales. I saw it in the window, he says, scratching the back of his neck. Thought Clara might, you know. Maybelle runs a hand over the pages. She'll love it when she's old enough. You can read it to her now. She lifts her gaze. I might read it to you. He chuckles, and something in his face relaxes. Later that night, she does just that. She sits near the fireplace, Clara asleep in her lap, and reads aloud a story about a coyote who turns into a star. Gideon listens from the armchair, legs stretched, head tilted back. At some point he closes his eyes, but he doesn't fall asleep, not really. He's listening. Maybelle can feel it, and so she reads on. One day, about a week in, she asks the question she's been holding in her chest like a hot stone. Why didn't you leave? They're sitting on the porch, watching a wagon roll past, wheels clicking like clock hands on cobble. Gideon doesn't pretend not to understand. I meant to, he says, but I couldn't. Why? He leans forward, elbows on his knees. Because I've spent 7 years running from everything that ever mattered. And then I found a woman passed out in the desert, half dead, with a baby in her arms. And for the first time in all that time, I didn't feel alone. She doesn't say anything, just reaches out and lays her hand gently over his. They sit that way until the sun touches the edge of the world. By the 12th day, Maybelle begins asking about the future. Not in those words, not directly, but she begins wondering aloud what Barton Springs is like in winter. If the doctor might train her in baby care. If there's a school, a chapel, a mercantile that needs help folding calico. Gideon hears all of it, stores it away. That night, he goes to the land office and asks about a small parcel 2 blocks from the church, just enough for a cottage. Maybe a fence. Maybe a porch wide enough for a rocking chair and a flower box. He doesn't sign anything. Not yet, but the map stays folded in his coat pocket just over his heart. On the 14th day, Clara begins to smile. Not gas or dreams real. Smiles. Open-eyed. Gummy grins that send Maybelle into tears and Gideon into the awkward kind of laughter a man makes when something inside him breaks open and he doesn't know how to put it back. He lifts Clara high, carefully, the way he once held another baby that never got the chance to smile. This one does. She drools on his collar, reaches for his beard. And Gideon whispers, "Hi there, little one." Like a man asking forgiveness from a life that never owed him any. Maybelle watches him with tears in her eyes. She doesn't say it, but it's the moment she knows. Not just that she's safe, not just that Barton Springs could be home, but that she's falling for him. Falling for the man who rides across deserts for people he doesn't know. Who says little, but means everything. Who listens with his whole presence. Who now rocks her daughter to sleep like she's something sacred. And it terrifies her. Because love, real love, means risk. It means giving your soul into another's hands and trusting they won't turn it to ash. She's done that once, and it nearly killed her. That night after supper, Maybelle lingers near the doorway of the parlor as Gideon reads. She waits for him to speak first. He does. Maybelle, she turns. I meant what I said. About not leaving. Her throat tightens. I know. I've been alone a long time, by choice. But I think. He breathes deep. I think I was wrong. She swallows hard. I've been alone too. But not by choice. Silence stretches between them. The kind that waits, not swallows. Then Gideon stands and walks toward her. If you stay, he says, voice low, not just in Barton Springs but in my life I can't promise much. I can't promise I'll always say the right thing, or know how to hold a baby proper, or make you laugh when you need it. Mabel's eyes glisten. But I can promise I won't run, he says. Not from you. Not from her. She steps into him, lays her hand on his chest. You already have it. He lowers his forehead to hers, breath warm and steady. For a long moment, they stand there, neither moving, neither rushing. And when he finally kisses her soft, sure, With a care that feels like prayer, it's not the start of something new. It's the continuation of something already chosen. In Barton Springs, everything has ears. The wooden walls of the boarding house carry voices like wind down a canyon. The shopkeepers hear more between purchases than they sell in merchandise. The preacher's wife knows by breakfast what every home cooked the night before. And by the time a week has passed, folks begin to talk. At first, it's just curiosity. They whisper about the man in black who rode into town with a woman and a baby, who rented rooms but only ever seems to sit across from her at supper, quiet and watchful. They wonder if she's his wife, if the baby is his, if maybe the story they tell that he found her in the desert isn't the whole truth. But then something shifts. The blacksmith sees Gideon carry the baby outside during a thunderclap and hold her close. Without flinching, Mrs. Hartley notices Maybelle humming again while sweeping, a habit she hadn't picked up until her cheeks got their color back. The pastor sees Gideon put coins in the chapel donation box anonymously, though no one had asked him to. And so the whispers change. Not judgment, not gossip, just quiet awe. Because people hear no suffering. They've buried wives, lost land, survived floods and fevers. And when they see a man like Gideon Blackwell, built like oak and forged in fire, softening at the edges because of a woman and her baby, they recognize it for what it is, healing. And they respect it, even if they don't fully understand it. By the third week, Gideon begins walking the town with Clara in his arms. Not every day, but often enough that folks grow used to the sight. The once feared cattle magnate, wiping drool off his collar with a handkerchief embroidered with MB. He's awkward, sure, still wears his revolver, still speaks like each word cost him something. But when Clara babbles nonsense at a passing cat or claps at wind chimes on the feed store porch, Gideon's face changes. It softens in a way that startles people. As if the man known for building empires now measures his days in tiny laughs and sticky fingers. Maybelle watches it all quietly. She doesn't insert herself, doesn't claim anything. But when people look at her now, they see something more than a desert survivor. They see a woman who once walked through the furnace and came out not just whole but luminous. She begins helping at the church on Thursdays, sewing altar cloths and patching hymnals. Mrs. Hartley insists she keep the calico gown, saying it suits her better than dust and grief ever did. Maybelle takes the compliment with a smile. She hasn't heard from Clancy's family since the dessert. Part of her hopes she never does. One evening, as the sun drops gold across the main street and thunder growls far off toward the mountain ridge, Gideon leads Maybelle through town, past the mill and over the dry creek bed that cuts behind the chapel. "I want to show you something," he says. Maybelle follows in silence. Clara is asleep in a sling against her chest. Her boots crunch soft over pebbled trail. The wind carries that electric smell, the kind that comes just before summer rain. They reach a plot of land untouched, just brush and stone and the curved stump of a mesquite. The mountains stand tall in the distance, painted pink and blue. It's quiet here, except for the hum of crickets and the far-off creak of windmills. Gideon steps beside her, pulls a folded document from his coat. 2 blocks from the chapel, 1/2 acre, good soil. Wind breaks naturally behind that rise. She doesn't speak. "I want to build a home here," he says. "Not a ranch house, not a lodge, a home. For you, for her, for me, if you'll have me there." Mabel's breath hitches. "I've been thinking about it every day since you walked into my life. No, since I nearly rode past you dying in the dirt. I don't want to leave again. And I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything because I stopped. I didn't stop out of pity. Maybelle." He turns to her, eyes raw. "I stopped because something in me needed to. And staying, it's not charity. It's salvation." She looks at the land, the curve of the earth, the cradle of silence between the hills. Then she whispers, "You're serious? I've never been more." And then she laughs, not out of disbelief, but joy. She steps forward, lays Clara gently in his arms, and runs her palm along the ridge where the wind lifts his coat. "You build the house," she says, "and I'll make sure it always smells like bread in the morning." Gideon doesn't speak. He just nods once. Then he holds her and the baby together against his chest, against the thunderclouds, against whatever storm may come and lets his heart say the words that his mouth can't yet manage. "I'm yours. I'm home." The storm breaks just after midnight. Not a desert trickle. Not one of those false start showers that patters and disappears. No, this one comes like the sky's been holding its breath for 100 years. Rain slams the shingles of the boarding house in thick waves. Thunder rolls over the valley like iron carts on stone. Wind shoves against the window panes, rattling them in their frames. The curtains snap, the lanterns flicker. and Maybelle stands in the hallway, barefoot, Clara cradled against her chest, staring at the front door as if she's waiting for something or someone to appear. She doesn't say it aloud, but the storm scares her. Not because she's afraid of thunder, not because of the wind, but because the last time the sky roared this loud, it was the day the mine collapsed. The day they pulled Clancy's helmet from the shaft and handed it to her with an apology. No one had the nerve to finish. She grips Clara tighter, and that's when she hears boots on the stairs. Gideon appears, shirt half-buttoned, suspenders loose. His eyes scan the hallway, then settle on her. "You all right?" She nods to fast. The wind howls. He doesn't ask, just walks forward and gently places a steadying hand on her back. "Come on. Downstairs. Safer there." She follows without a word. They settle in the parlor near the hearth, where the stone chimney muffles some of the storm's tantrum. Mrs. Hartley has already placed dry wood near the stove, just in case. Gideon lights a match and coaxes the flames to life. Soon, warmth spills across the room in orange waves. Clara quiets. Her tiny body relaxes against Mabel's chest. Lulled by the heat and the closeness, Maybelle lowers herself onto the couch, wraps a blanket around her legs, and stares into the fire. Gideon sits across from her, elbows on knees, watching her more than the flames. "You were shaking." "I'm fine. You don't have to lie." She presses her lips together. Then, in a whisper, "It sounds like the day they told me Clancy was dead." Gideon nods once. "Yeah, I know that sound." "You do." He doesn't answer right away, just watches the fire snap and spit. "Then, when I lost Evelyn, it rained the next morning, heavy, the kind that makes the dirt bleed. We had to wait. Today's before the undertaker could reach us. I remember watching the sky like it was God himself, wondering if he was crying for her or for me." Maybelle exhales slowly. "Did it help?" "The rain, no," he says quietly, "but it gave me something else to blame." She studies his face. Gideon rarely speaks about Evelyn, about the baby he lost, about the years he spent turning grief into granite. But tonight, with the wind howling like a wounded beast and Clara nestled between them, something shifts. Maybe it's the storm, or maybe it's trust finally rooted deep enough not to be blown away. "I blamed God for a long time," she admits. "And then I blamed Clancy for leaving me, for not digging faster, for not surviving like I needed him to. And now, she looks down at Clara. Now I'm tired of blaming anyone. I just want to live again." Gideon reaches across the space between them, his hand open. She places hers in it. They stay like that for a long time, fingers twined, firelight dancing, rain carving songs into the roof. By morning, the storm has passed, and with it, something else. Gideon rises early, despite the sleepless night, and walks the town in his boots, with mud caked high around the ankles. The roads are slick, the creek swollen, but the sun is out, bright and soft, like a second chance poured into the sky. He stops by the plot again, the one near the chapel, and checks the land. No washout, no flooding. The soil's still good. Better, maybe. Back at the boarding house, Maybelle has moved into the sunroom. She sits with Clara in a little patch of morning light, humming softly while threading a needle. She looks up when he walks in. "Everything all right?" she asks. "Better than all right." He wipes mud from his palms. "The land held." She smiles, relieved, and he adds, "The lumber order arrives tomorrow, if you're still willing to have that bread-smelling kitchen." Her smile deepens. "You sure you're ready for hammers and blisters and splinters in your fancy hands?" Gideon chuckles. "I built my first bunkhouse with a busted thumb and a fever. I'll manage." She tilts her head. "So, we're doing this, really doing it." "I already ordered the nails," he says, "so it'd be embarrassing to back out now." She laughs again, and Clara joins with a gurgle, throwing her tiny hands in the air as if blessing the whole idea. The town gets wind of the plan by that afternoon. Mrs. Hartley overhears a conversation at the feed store. The blacksmith spots Gideon pacing out foundation lines with a measuring rope. The banker, a man with a mustache more intimidating than his ledger, gets asked about a mortgage, and answers with a shrug and a grin. By dusk, everyone knows, and no one is surprised. They don't need an engagement ring or a wedding notice. The way Gideon looks at Maybelle and the way she holds Clara, while watching him hammer the first stakes into the dirt, those are vows, clear as daylight. They aren't loud people, but they're loud in love, quietly, unmistakably loud. The next 2 weeks fly by like wind through a canyon. Gideon works from dawn till dusk with calloused hands and sweat-streaked sleeves. He builds slow, but strong, every plank measured twice, every nail set firm. Maybelle brings water in tin cups, bread wrapped in cloth, and sometimes just herself, sitting in the shade watching him work, Clara cooing in her lap, Neighbors start helping. The blacksmith lends tools. The preacher stops by with extra nails. Even Elijah Ward shows up one morning, dusty from the wire station, offering spare oil lanterns for when the house goes up proper. They build not just a home but a beginning, one with a front porch wide, enough for 2 rocking chairs and a view of the cottonwoods, a kitchen with morning sun, a cradle by the window, and a hearth that, Maybelle insists, must burn cedar because it smells like courage. Gideon doesn't argue. He just builds it, brick by brick. Memory by memory. One night, long after the last board has been laid and the roof sealed tight against sky, Maybelle steps into the finished house for the first time. It smells of pine and fresh hope. Clara sleeps against her shoulder. Gideon waits by the door, nervous in a way that doesn't fit his usual steel and grit posture. Well, he asks. She turns a slow circle: the kitchen, the sitting room, the staircase, the quiet promise in every corner. Then she smiles. It's perfect. He exhales like he's been holding it for weeks. She crosses to him, lays her free hand against his chest. I want to raise her here, she whispers. With you. You already are. No, I mean, she hesitates. As a family. Gideon swallows hard. His throat works around the words. Say it again, he says. As a family. He kisses her then, full and certain. One hand around her waist, the other resting protectively on Clara's back. And in that kiss, there are no ghosts. No grief, no fire, no desert. Just now, just this. Just the richest man west of the Rockies, and the woman he found dying in the dirt, choosing to live not because fate gave them a miracle, but because they built one with their own hands. Gideon's hands still carry splinters from the final roof beam, even now, days after they moved into the little house near the chapel. His palms are scabbed and calloused in ways they hadn't been in years. The kind of work he once paid others to do now lines his fingers with proof that some things are worth building yourself. And still, there's one thing left unfinished. One morning, just after sunrise, he finds Maybelle in the kitchen, humming to herself as she kneads dough. On the counter, Clara is asleep in the cradle nearby, one tiny hand curled in a fist against her cheek. The smell of yeast, warm and familiar, fills the air. He watches from the doorway for a moment, arms crossed, boots dusty, then clears his throat. She glances up, strands of flour-dusted hair clinging to her cheek. You're up early. I didn't sleep much. She arches a brow. Bad dreams? No. He pauses. Too many thoughts. She sets the dough aside to rise and wipes her hands on her apron. Well, let's hear them. He crosses the room slowly. I've done a lot in my life I don't regret. Built an empire. Survived loss. Kept to myself when it made sense. Maybelle waits. But this house, this kitchen, you? He meets her eyes. This is the first time I've wanted something to last. Her lips part slightly. So I wrote something down, he adds. Didn't know if it was a proposal or just an honest promise. From his coat pocket, he pulls a folded slip of paper. Maybelle takes it with trembling fingers and reads silently. It isn't flowery. No rhyming lines. No borrowed poetry. Just 10 simple lines in Gideon's blocky handwriting. I will keep the fire going. Even when the world feels cold, I will carry the weight when you need to rest. I will speak less and listen more. I will guard this home with everything I have. I will never make you feel small for surviving. I will love your daughter as if she were born from me. I will not run. I will not forget. I will build a life, not a legacy. And I will choose you every day. For the rest of them, when she looks up, her eyes are glassed with tears. It's a vow, she says. Voice breaking. He nods. I thought maybe we could write ours, instead of using someone else's words. She folds the paper slowly, holds it to her chest. Then without a word, she turns to the table, tears a sheet from the back of a ledger, and begins to write. Gideon waits. He doesn't peek. He doesn't pace. He simply watches her, the curve of her back, the steady hand, the way she bites her lip in thought. And when she finishes, she walks over and hands him her vow. Her lines are messier, more rushed, but each one is stitched in warmth. I will wake before the sun to make sure the house smells like bread. I will hold you when the past knocks louder than the present. I will teach Clara that gentleness is stronger than grit. I will not be afraid of the fire that made you who you are. I will keep a chair empty beside me until you sit down. I will speak your name when you forget it. I will be soft when the world is hard. I will forgive what you don't say. I will plant wildflowers by the porch every spring. And I will love you before, during, and after the storms. He reads it twice, then. In that quiet kitchen, Gideon Blackwell KNELS. No ring. No preacher. Just the slow, honest weight of a man choosing. Will you marry me, Maybelle Mercer. She drops to her knees beside him, one hand on his cheek, the other on his chest. I already have. They married the next Sunday. No announcements, no dresses, no grand gathering, just the pastor, the creek running high with spring melt, Clara gurgling in Mrs. Hartley's arms, and a small knot of neighbors who show up because real love doesn't stay hidden for long in Barton Springs. Maybelle wears the same calico gown Gideon once complimented. Her hair is pinned with wild flowers she picked that morning, hands still wet with dew. Gideon wears a clean shirt and a vest nice for every day. His revolver, as always, sits at his hip, but it's the soft eyes that make him look dangerous today. Not dangerous because of what he might do. Dangerous because of how deeply he feels. They read their vows, handwritten and simple. There isn't a dry eye on the bank, and when the time comes to seal it, Gideon pulls a small box from his coat. Inside are rings, hand-carved from mesquite wood, sanded smooth by his own fingers. Maybelle gasps softly. You made them. I wanted something no one else could give you. She slides his onto his hand, voice steady. With this, I choose the long road. He slides hers onto her finger. With this, I walk it with you. They kiss. Clara lets out a delighted screech, as if blessing the whole thing with the baby's joy. And somewhere behind the preacher, Mrs. Hartley sniffles and mutters, I told you. Quiet love's the loudest kind. Life after the wedding changes. In small, certain ways, they still wake early. Maybelle still hums as she bakes. Gideon still spends hours fixing things that don't need fixing just to keep busy. But now he does it with one ear tuned to the cradle, half an eye on the swing. Maybelle set up outside. They take long walks after supper, the baby bundled in Gideon's old coat, while the stars begin to blink awake. And sometimes, late at night, Maybelle will find him standing at the bedroom window, staring out at the cottonwoods with a look on his face that says he's remembering a time when everything he touched turned to ash. She steps behind him, wraps her arms around his waist. Still think about her. He nods. You still love her. He nods again. Always will. Maybelle rests her cheek against his back. Me too. He turns, surprised. I think about Clancy every time I look at Clara's eyes, she says. He's part of her, and part of me, but he's not what's next. You are. Gideon leans down, touches his forehead to hers, and for once, he doesn't feel guilt for surviving. He just feels full. That spring, the house becomes more than a home. It becomes a place where others come when the weather turns or when sorrow knocks to hard, where travelers passing through find fresh bread and a place to tie their horse, where neighbors gather on Sundays after service, sharing peach preserves and fiddle tunes. It becomes a landmark, not because it's large, not because it's rich, but because it was built with hands that had known loss and filled with voices that had chosen love anyway. And every so often, someone new will ask the question, how did it all begin? And Maybelle will smile. She'll set down whatever she's holding, take Clara's hand, and say, it started in the desert, with a man who wasn't looking, and a woman who thought she was dying, but instead she was about to live. It starts with hoofbeats, not the rhythmic, even kind that means neighbors riding through or supply wagons on routine runs. No, this is something else. A single horse, fast, urgent, cutting across the dirt road that separates Gideon and Mabel's little home from the hills behind it, the kind of approach that brings messages or trouble, but rarely both. Gideon hears it first. He's out behind the house, chopping kindling, sleeves rolled, shirt damp from spring sweat. He straightens mid-swing, axe still in hand, and listens. A crow calls once from the old mesquite, then goes silent. Even the wind seems to pause. Inside, Maybelle is folding Clara's blankets on the rocker, unaware. The baby sleeps in the corner, lips parting with each shallow breath. Sunlight crawls through the open shutters, warm and gold. Then comes the knock. Sharp. 3 times. Gideon wipes his hands on a rag and heads to the door. He opens it slowly. Standing on the porch is a man Gideon doesn't recognize. Late 30s, dust-covered duster. One boot torn at the heel. His face is angular, worn, and his eyes flick with a wariness that says he hasn't been welcome in many places lately. You Blackwell? I am. The man nods, swallows. I got a message from a man named Wilkes. Telegraph out of Yuma. Said you'd know what it means. Gideon's jaw tenses. Wilkes is an old business contact, rail interest, usually too proud to send riders. He steps outside. What's the message? The man reaches into his coat and hands over a folded slip. Gideon opens it. The handwriting is unmistakable. Wilkes's rushed, slanted scrawl. Blackwell, urgent. Survey crew found silver vein east of your Mojave track. Needs decision. Competition. Moving fast. Meet me in Yuma before end of week or it's gone. Wilkes for a long time, Gideon just stares at the note. Then he looks out across the yard. At the wash line, at the cradle, through the window, at the porch rail, Maybelle painted blue. He folds the message slowly, tucks it into his vest pocket, then he turns back to the writer. Tell Wilkes I'm not interested. The man blinks. He said it was urgent. I said I'm not interested. A beat of silence. Then the writer nods once, shrugs, and turns back to his horse. Within minutes, the hoofbeats fade behind the hills. Gideon doesn't mention it right away. He goes back to the woodpile, splits another dozen logs, keeps his hands moving. The sun climbs higher, but his thoughts run deeper. There was a time just months ago when he would have been on that horse within the hour, before breakfast cooled, before his bed had even gone cold. But now everything has changed. He walks inside around midday, hands raw, brow streaked with dust. Maybelle looks up. You all right? He nods. Just tired. She sees the edge in his expression, something left unsaid but doesn't press. Instead, she pours him a cup of water and hands him a cloth for his hands. Later, when Clara is down for her nap and the house is quiet, Gideon stands at the window and finally speaks. I got an offer. Maybelle sets down her embroidery. From who? Wilkes. Railroad crew in Yuma found silver east of that Mojave parcel. Says if I don't move fast, someone else will claim it. She waits. Are you going? He turns to face her fully. No. She doesn't look surprised, but she looks cautious, like she's waiting for the catch. Why not? Because I have everything I want right here. She rises slowly, crosses to him. I believe you, she says, but I also know men like you don't stop chasing fire without getting burned. He exhales hard. I'm not chasing anymore. I'm building. She touches his chest. Then let me help you stay. The next day, Gideon goes to town. Not for supplies. Not for news. He walks into the telegraph office, pulls out Wilkes' message, and sends a reply. Wilkes, you chase it. I've built what I need. Silver don't mean much to a man holding gold in his arms every night. Gideon Blackwell tips the operator a coin, then walks out into the sun and buys Clara a small rattle shaped like a duck. That evening, he gives it to her before supper. Maybelle watches him play on the rug with their daughter, this man who once negotiated $1 million contracts now making duck noises with his callous fingers. And when she wipes her eyes, it's not out of sadness, it's out of knowing this is the life most folks don't believe exists. But the past has a long reach. 3 nights later, another knock. This time it's the sheriff. An older man, grain beard, slow drawl. He's respectful, almost apologetic. Evening, Blackwell, Mrs. Blackwell. Gideon steps onto the porch. Something wrong. Had a fella pass through yesterday. Said he knew you. Claims you cheated him in a land deal 5 years ago. Gideon's face doesn't change. Name? Trent Summers. Gideon sighs. He sold me scrubland for cattle expansion. I turned it into usable grazing. He expected oil. Didn't get it. Blamed me instead of his own poor survey. The sheriff nods. He was drunk. Made noise in the saloon. Said he might come calling. Figured I'd warn you. Gideon glances over his shoulder at the crib where Clara sleeps. You think he's dangerous. Reckless, not dangerous. But when a man's got nothing left to lose, he stops caring who he hurts. Maybelle appears behind him, quiet as breath. He threatened us. No, ma'am, but he's bitter. And bitter men do stupid things. Gideon nods. Thanks for the warning. The sheriff tips his hat. You need anything, you come find me. As he rides off, Gideon closes the door behind him. Maybelle waits. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I'll sleep by the window tonight. She steps closer. You don't have to do this alone. He pulls her into his chest. I won't, but I'll be damned if I let anything I built here get taken. She leans into him. I know, she whispers, but let's build from love, not fear. He nods, holds her tighter, and outside, somewhere in the dark, a past mistake rides the edge of town, still hungry for something that slipped through his fingers. For 3 nights, Gideon keeps watch. He sleeps in the front room with his rifle propped by the door, a lamp burning low, and the curtains drawn halfway so he can see the road but not be seen from it. The rocking chair creaks when he leans back, and it's low, steady, the rhythm of a man who has waited out storms before. Maybelle doesn't fight him on it, but she leaves the bedroom door cracked open. And every now and then, when Clara cries or the floorboards shift under the weight of old pine, she steps out barefoot in her shawl and simply places a hand on his shoulder before returning to bed. He doesn't say anything when she does, but he sleeps better afterward, even if he won't admit it. It's the 4th morning when the smoke shows up on the hill. Not much, just A thin column, a campfire maybe, too far to be casual, but too close to be random. Gideon spots it just after sunrise while checking the fence line with a field glass. He lowers the scope slowly, jaw tight, heart already calculating. Trent Summers. He hasn't come into town. Hasn't shown his face. But Gideon knows a watcher when he sees one. He returns to the house. Boots scuffing against the porch. Maybelle is on the steps with Claire in her arms, humming something soft. She looks up and sees his face. You saw him. He nods. Is he coming? Not yet. But he's close. She swallows hard. Do we need to leave? The question stings more than he expects. No, he says gently. I won't run from a man who's got less to lose than I do. She rises. You have more to protect. He takes the baby from her arms and presses a kiss to Clara's forehead before whispering, exactly. That night, Gideon lights a second lantern. He oils the rifle, checks the rounds, sits straighter. Maybelle stays beside him now. She won't sleep in the bedroom alone. Instead, she wraps Clara in blankets and rocks her by the hearth while Gideon stares out into the dark. They don't talk much. They don't need to. There's comfort in the small sounds, the shifting coals, the baby's sleepy grunts, the way Maybelle hums just under her breath like a steady heartbeat. Then, just after midnight, the dog barks, a neighbor's shepherd, far off. Once, twice, then silence. Gideon stands. Rifle in hand. He moves to the front door and peers through the side slit. Nothing. But he waits. 10 minutes. Then 20. Still nothing. Until a flicker. Not fired. Reflection. Off metal. To the left. Just beyond the old fence line. He moves quietly to the back window and angles the rifle barrel toward the dark. His breathing slows. His heart doesn't race, it focuses. And then movement. A figure. Dismounted. Leaning near the gate. Holding something. Gideon doesn't call out. He doesn't shoot. He watches. And then the figure sets something on the ground and walks away. No noise. Just the sound of boots fading into dirt. Gideon waits another full minute. Then eases the door open and steps out into the cold. At the gate, he finds it. A bottle. Cheap rye. And tied to the neck with twine. A note. You ruined my life. But I see now it wasn't your fault. You made something. I lost mine. That house. It's the most alive thing I've seen in years. I'll go. Don't follow. No name. But Gideon knows who wrote it. He stands in the dark, when tugging at his sleeves, and exhales a breath that's been locked in his ribs for days. He doesn't touch the bottle. He just leaves it there. And walks back to the house. Maybelle is waiting by the window. He sets the rifle down and leans against the wall, finally letting himself feel the ache in his bones. He left, she asks. He did. She crosses to him and wraps her arms around his middle. He lets out a breath. And for the first time in nights, it sounds like peace. He saw the house. Gideon says after a while. Said it looked alive. She smiles. Against his chest. That's because it is. He pulls her close, his voice barely audible. I almost went after him. Not out of anger. Out of something else. Guilt maybe. Or pride. But you didn't. No. Because you were here. Because she's here. Because I finally understand what staying means. She doesn't reply. Just lifts her chin and kisses his jaw. That night, they sleep in their bed again, together. With the window open. And no lamp burning. Because some kinds of safety come not from rifles or fences but from promises that hold in the dark. Days pass, then weeks. Spring rolls into early summer, and Barton Springs grows green and bright around them. The air smells of cotton blossoms and baking bread. The roads dry out, children race along the fences. Maybelle plants wildflowers by the porch just as she once vowed. Gideon rigs a swing from an old oak branch, and Clara, now for months old, laughs like thunder at the way the wind lifts her. The house becomes theirs, truly. Room by room, meal by meal. Memory by memory. Gideon fixes a crooked cabinet door one afternoon and realizes he hasn't thought about silver mines or bank ledgers in over 2 weeks. He still has wealth, still owns more land than he can name in 3 counties. But here, this porch, this family, this woman, this is where his riches live now. And it feels like enough. No more than enough. It feels like everything. By midsummer, the town of Barton Springs stops referring to Maybelle as the widow with the baby and starts calling her Mrs. Blackwell, not because of any formal announcement or courthouse document, but because they see the way Gideon carries Clara on his shoulder through the general store, absent-mindedly humming while she tugs his collar. Because they hear Maybelle laugh through the church windows on Sunday morning, that laugh that never used to come before he moved into her world. Because they know what it means when a man who once sat in silence for years now lingers after town. Meetings, trading stories about fence posts and biscuit recipes. They see a man unlearning solitude, and a woman choosing joy. No one says it outright, but everyone knows. Whatever happened between that dessert and this doorstep, it was real enough to change everything. Even the wind seems to blow differently around that little house now. Softer, warmer, like the land itself has given its blessing. One morning, just before dawn, Gideon wakes to the sound of Clara's fussing. He rolls out of bed before Maybelle can move, kisses her forehead, and whispers, "Sleep. I've got her." She doesn't argue. He carries Clara out onto the porch, wrapped in her soft blue blanket, and sits in the rocking chair as the sky turns, the color of copper coins. She settles against his chest with a hiccup, then sighs and falls asleep again. He rocks slowly, listens to the waking sounds of the world birds, a mule braying in the distance, a breeze moving through the tall grass like someone whispering good news. And he thinks, so this is fatherhood. Not the thunderstorm of it. Not the stories men tell in saloons about raising wild sons or hard lessons, but the quieter kind. The kind where you memorize the shape of your baby's breathing and feel proud for catching her tears before they fall. It terrifies him how much he loves her, and how much more he loves Maybelle because of it. Not because she gave life, but because she gave him one. Later that day, he finds Maybelle in the kitchen, barefoot and laughing as she reads aloud from a letter. Aunt Gertie is coming to visit. She says between giggles, she wants to meet you, and she expects bread, fresh linens, and a man with clean fingernails for once. Gideon holds up his calloused hands. I'm doomed. Maybelle grins. She means well. When's she arriving? 3 days. Gideon considers. I'll build her a swing too. For a 72-year-old, she'll love it. Maybelle shakes her head, still smiling. You really don't know how to stop giving, do you? He moves behind her, wraps his arms around her waist, presses his lips to the base of her neck. Only to you. Clara gurgles from her cradle. Maybelle leans back into him and whispers, and her, especially her. That afternoon, the preacher stops by to deliver a hymn book Maybelle had requested. He pauses on the porch when he sees the new flower beds, the freshly painted shutters, the wind chimes made from old silverware dancing above the window. Looks like heaven's moved to Barton Springs, he says with a slow smile. Maybelle welcomes him in. Gideon serves coffee. Clara sits on the preacher's knee and grabs his beard with determination. He winces, then laughs. She's strong, he says. She gets that from her mother. Gideon replies. The preacher studies them for a moment, the way their bodies angle toward each other even without thinking. The way Clara reaches instinctively for Gideon's thumb. The way Maybelle rests her hand on his back without needing to speak. I've married folks for 20 years, he says softly, but I've only seen this a few times. What's that? Maybelle asks. He nods toward their little trio. A love that was never supposed to happen, but happened anyway. And because of that, it shines a little brighter. Neither Gideon nor Maybelle says anything. They don't need to. The preacher rises, straightens his coat, and adds before he leaves, you ever want a second ceremony? Something under the cottonwoods, I'd be honored. They walk him out in silence. Then Maybelle turns to Gideon and asks, would you? Would I what? Marry me again. With flowers and music, and witnesses this time. He looks at her for a long moment. Tomorrow, or next year, or every week after this. She laughs and leans into his side. One'll do. But not everything is perfect. One evening, after the baby has gone down and supper plates sit empty on the table, Maybelle leans back and sighs. I had a nightmare last night. Gideon looks up from where he's sharpening a knife. What about the dessert? Only this time, I was alone again. Clara was gone. You never came. He sets the knife down. It felt so real. She continues, voice tight. I woke up reaching for her. Gideon crosses the room into steps, kneels by her chair, takes her hands. I'm here, he says. You're not alone. You never will be again. She looks away, blinking fast. I know. I just sometimes. The fear comes back, even when the danger's gone. He presses his forehead to hers. That's what healing feels like. It's not forgetting. It's learning to breathe again anyway. She kisses him softly. And when they lie in bed that night, he holds her until sleep takes the fear away. On Sunday, Aunt Gertie arrives. She's smaller than Maybelle remembered, hair whiter, voice louder. She wears gloves even in June and critiques Gideon's porch swing. Before she's all the way out of the wagon, this the man? She asks Maybelle with narrowed eyes. This is him. HMM. Then she steps forward, eyes Gideon up and down, and mutters, better than the last one. Gideon raises an eyebrow. Thank you, Mum. Don't thank me yet. I snore. They laugh. and the house fills with a kind of noise it hasn't known before, family noise. The kind that lingers in corners, that clings to dishes, that makes even the silence feel warmer after it leaves. That night, after Gertie is snoring exactly as promised and Clara is sleeping soundly, Gideon and Maybelle sit on the porch swing, holding hands. Fireflies blink across the grass, the moon hangs low and kind. "I've been thinking," she says. "Dangerous." She nudges him. "What if we had another porch swing? Another baby?" Gideon stills, looks at her, then down at her hand in his. "I never thought I'd have this life," he whispers. "And I never thought I'd want more than what I've already got." She waits. "But with you," he says, voice cracking. "I want a whole field full of children. I want noise, and mess, and birthdays, and mornings like this one forever." She smiles, then lays her head on his shoulder, and beneath them, the swing creaks in rhythm with a life neither of them planned but now can't imagine losing. The envelope arrives on a Tuesday. No return address. Just Gideon Blackwell written in block letters. The ink smeared slightly like the writer's hand was shaking. It's Maybelle who finds it wedged beneath the bakery catalog and a folded flyer for the town's midsummer fair. She brings it inside, fingers tracing the edges, and sets it on the kitchen table next to the bread dough rising in its bowl. "You expecting anything?" she asks. Gideon wipes his hands on a cloth. "No." But when he sees the handwriting, something in his chest tightens. He recognizes it. Barely. He sits down, pulls a knife from the drawer, and slices the envelope open in one motion. Maybelle watches, careful not to press. Inside is a single sheet, short, to the point. Mer. Blackwell. "My name is Lydia Bennett. I'm the daughter of your former foreman, Reuben Bennett. My father passed last winter. His last request was that I write to you and thank you for what you gave him, work when he needed it most. A second chance when no one else would. He never forgot it. He also told me something else. That you once had a son who never had the chance to live. He said you never named him. If it matters, I think the name Elijah would have suited him. My father said you saved more than just men's wages. You saved their dignity, and sometimes their hearts. I thought you should know, sincerely." Lydia Bennett. Gideon reads the letter twice, then lays it flat on the table, hands still. Maybelle reaches over, brushes his knuckles with her fingers. "You okay?" He nods, slowly. "I didn't know Reuben died. You worked for me back when I was still in the mines. Before cattle, before land. Did you really save his life?" "I don't know. I just gave him a job when he was broken out of options. He stayed on for years. Honest man, quiet, and the rest." Gideon's voice is low. "We never named the boy. Evelyn and I. We said we would once we held him. But you didn't get that chance. No." Maybelle lifts the letter gently, reads it herself. "Elijah," she murmurs. "It's a good name." Gideon nods, staring out the window, eyes wet, then almost to himself. It would have suited him. That night, Gideon walks to the edge of the property alone. The moon is high, washing the cottonwoods in silver. The wind carries a smell of sage and distant rain. He kneels beneath the old tree, the one where Clara's swing is tied. Digs a small hole, not deep, just enough. He buries the letter, then smooths the dirt and whispers, "Elijah." Just once. Then stands. And walks back toward the warm light of the house, where Maybelle is waiting with a candle in her hand and Clara asleep against her chest. The next day, Gideon asks Maybelle if she'd like to take a trip. "A trip," she says, brushing Clara's hair, "just for a few days. North. I want to show you something." She eyes him. "Silver Ridge." He nods. "Why now?" "Because I think it's time." She smiles. "Then let's go." They travel light, one satchel, 3 changes of clothes, a blanket for Clara, and a tin of dried pears. The ride north takes 2 days, past hills and creeks and dry plains peppered with windmills. The land feels different here. Not just drier, but older, like it remembers too much and speaks only when the wind is strong enough to rattle it loose. Silver Ridge isn't much of a town anymore. Just 2 streets, a leaning saloon, and the church bell Gideon paid for back when he was still trying to outbuild his grief. They ride in at noon. The blacksmith recognizes him instantly. Taps his hat. "Didn't think you'd ever come back." Gideon nods. "Didn't think I would either." They stay in a room above the old general store, the same room Gideon once rented the week after Evelyn's funeral. Maybelle says nothing. When he tells her that, just lays Clara down gently and opens the window to let the air in. That evening, they walk to the cemetery. No fence, no gate, just stones, worn and crooked, poking from the earth like broken teeth. Gideon leads them to the far corner. To a marker, unnamed. He kneels. This is where they buried him. After the fire, the church didn't ask questions. I couldn't speak long enough to give them one. Maybelle lowers herself beside him, holds his hand. You don't have to say anything, she whispers, but he does. He tells her about Evelyn's laugh. About the way she danced barefoot when it rained. About the way she cried the first time she felt the baby kick. He says the things he never said out loud before, not to a soul. Maybelle listens, quiet, unflinching. And when he finishes, she pulls from her bag a small wooden cross. She presses it into the earth beside the stone and carves into the dirt with her fingertip. Elijah, Gideon weeps. But it isn't the kind of weeping that breaks a man. It's the kind that lets him heal. They leave the next morning. Ride home in silence, with the wind behind them. And when Barton Springs rises on the horizon, Clara lets out a happy squeal, as if recognizing the place that smells like bread and love and second chances. That night, after supper, Maybelle finds Gideon in the nursery. He's holding Clara, rocking her gently. And singing a lullaby neither of them remembers learning. One of those old songs passed down from voice to voice until it becomes part of the air itself. Maybelle leans against the doorframe and watches, not saying a word, because in this moment, in this room, with the weight of the past finally buried, there is nothing left to fix, only everything to live. They say it only floods once a decade in Barton Springs, and even then, it's more inconvenience than danger. A few muddy boots, a plank bridge washed out, chickens roosting on windowsills. But this time, it's different. The rains begin on a Thursday. Soft at first, a blessing. The kind of spring rain that soaks the roots deep and makes the cottonwoods bloom faster than they should. Gideon stands on the porch that morning, mug in hand, and watches the drops splatter against the dirt road. It smells clean, alive. Maybelle hums inside, kneading bread, and Clara is babbling to her tin duck on the floor. Everything feels exactly as it should. Until nightfall. That's when the wind shifts. The rain comes harder, now in sheets and thunder, rolls low and long like a war drum beneath the earth. By midnight, the creek is no longer a creek, it's a river, deep, wide, foaming over its banks and swallowing fence posts as it moves. By dawn, Gideon knows they're in trouble. He's out in the storm, coat soaked through, pulling tools and supplies into the loft above the barn. Maybelle watches from the window with Clara in her arms, heart tight. The river isn't just high, it's hungry, and it's creeping closer. The neighbors come riding by in a panic. Bridge is gone. Someone yells. Preacher's place took a hit. Dry creeks. Over the road. Another shouts. Gideon runs inside, drenched and grim. We need to go, he says. Maybelle nods. No questions. No panic. Just action. They gather what they can: blankets, food, Clara's things. Maybelle tucks the family Bible into her satchel without thinking. Gideon slings the rifle across his back. He straps Clara to his chest in the sling Maybelle stitched from curtain fabric and wool. Outside, the river has reached the front gate. Then the porch. The swing Maybelle loved floats for a moment, then snaps loose and vanishes down the current, like a memory too heavy to hold on to. They mount the horse omen, faithful and restless, and turn uphill toward town, toward safety. Gideon doesn't look back, because if he does, he's afraid he'll turn to salt. The road is more mud than trail. Water laps at their boots, and the wind howls like it's warning them to turn around. But they keep going, Gideon holding the reins with one hand and shielding Clara with the other. Maybelle clutching his waist, face pressed to his spine. Every few feet, Omen stumbles. But the horse doesn't stop, not until they reach the hill, just above Barton Springs. And then they see it. The town. Underwater. Not all of it, but enough. The main road is flooded knee-deep. The chapel's front steps are submerged. The mercantile has water crawling across its floorboards. People are on roofs waiting for help. The sheriff and half a dozen townsfolk are already wading through with ropes and barrels, pulling the old and the young to high ground. Gideon jumps down. We help, he says. Maybelle takes Clara. I'll go to the telegraph house. It's dry up the ridge. He nods. She hesitates. Come back to me, she says. He cups her face. Always. Then he's in the water. The next hours are chaos. Gideon hauls a grandmother through waist-deep water, lifts two children from a second-story window, kicks in a door with the sheriff to free a family trapped in the old bakery. The current is strong, pulling at his legs, threatening to take his footing. But he plants himself like an oak with each step. He doesn't let go. Not once. Every time he turns, someone is yelling, Blackwell over here. And every time he answers. By mid-afternoon, he's soaked, bleeding from one hand, and covered in grit. But no one has died. Not yet. That's when the cry comes. Horse, someone yells. Horse in the river. Gideon turns. It's not just a horse. It's a wagon, and it's heading straight for the postmaster's boy. Gideon doesn't think. He runs. The boy may be 6, frozen in fear, standing on a root by the edge of the road. The wagon, broken loose from someone's barn, is barreling downstream. Wheels jerking like snap bones. Gideon charges through the water. Lifts the boy and jumps. They hit the ground. Just as the wagon slams past, missing them by inches, the boy sobs. Gideon doesn't feel the bruise on his ribs. Doesn't register the scrape down his arm. He just holds the child close. "You're all right now," he says. "You saved him." The boy whimpers. Gideon nods once. "Go." He hands him off to a neighbor and turns just in time to see the hillside and the figure running down it. Maybelle. Clara in her arms. Her hair is soaked, face streaked with tears. "I thought," she gasps. "I couldn't see you." "I'm fine," he says, voice ragged. He takes them both in his arms. And for the first time that day, the storm in his chest breaks, too. The flood doesn't recede until 2 days later. It leaves behind mud, debris, and silence, but no dead. Thanks to the town's efforts, thanks to Gideon, everyone made it out. The chapel holds a service the next morning. People come in their work clothes, covered in mud, some still barefoot. Maybelle sits beside Gideon, Clara asleep on her shoulder. When the preacher rises, his voice is soft. "This town was built by men with hammers and women with bread," he says. "But today, it was held together by something else." He turns to Gideon, and sometimes, it takes a man who lost everything to remind us how much we have to save. No applause. Just silence. Then Maybelle reaches for Gideon's hand, and every eye in the church sees it, sees the man who once rode alone across the Mojave, now rooted beside a woman and child, and a town that finally knows him not for his money but for his heart. The mud takes weeks to dry. Every wagon wheel in Barton Springs groans under the weight of it. Every boot squelches with each step. The streets, once dusty and familiar, now smell of river water and broken roots. And yet something new has taken root alongside the wreckage. Gratitude. The kind that doesn't need a speech. The kind you feel in how people tip their hats a little deeper. In how neighbors stop by without being asked, offering a plank, a shovel, a hand. And how every soul knows what was nearly lost and chooses not to forget. The Blackwell's home. By some miracle, stood the water, reached the porch but stopped there, as if remembering something sacred. The swing is gone. The wildflowers are flattened, but the walls hold. The stove lights, the cradle still rocks. And so, day by day, they begin again. Gideon replaces the porch rail. Maybelle replants the flowers, one root at a time. Clara laughs when the breeze lifts her bonnet again, like she knows the world tried to come undone, but didn't quite succeed. One morning, a week after the last of the water drains from the lower fields, the sheriff visits. He stands on the steps with his hat in hand, boots caked in half-dried silt. "Gideon, sheriff, got word from Yuma." Gideon raises an eyebrow. The sheriff hands him a folded note. "From Wilkes." Gideon doesn't take it right away. The sheriff shrugs. "Heard you saved half the town. Figured you earned the right to know what you turned down." Gideon opens the paper, reads. Then folds it again and burns it in the kitchen stove without a word. Maybelle watches from across the room. "What was it?" she asks gently later. "Strike hit," he says. "They found silver. And the price of not going was worth every cent." She smiles, walks over and brushes sawdust from his shoulder. "That's the richest thing you've ever said." That evening, Gideon walks to the edge of their property and finds the place where the old swing used to hang. The branch is still good, strong. He starts over, carves the new seat himself. Not from pine but mesquite, same as the rings he made for their vows. It takes him 3 days. Maybelle doesn't ask what he's doing. She just watches, waits. When it's finished, he calls her out at sunset. Clara is in her arms. He gestures to the swing. "For her, for you." Maybelle runs her hand over the polished wood. "It's beautiful. She deserves something that will hold." "So do I," she says quietly. He doesn't reply, just wraps an arm around her, then leans into the quiet. The kind of quiet that waits. The kind that says, "We made it. We're still here." The fair is held 2 weeks after the flood, just beyond the chapel on the town's highest hill. Not much, just a few booths, a pie contest, a quilt raffle, and some kids chasing chickens for a prize. But it's enough. Enough to remind everyone that joy still lives here. Gideon wins second place in the arm wrestling contest. Maybelle wins first for her peach cobbler. Clara wins every heart that sees her in her little blue bonnet, clapping at the fiddle music. When the sun begins to dip and the townsfolk gather for one last square dance, someone calls for Gideon and Maybelle to join. He hesitates. She grins. "Come on," she says. "You've carried me through a river. I think you can manage a waltz." Relents. They take the floor. And there, under string lights and against the rhythm of a fiddle and guitar, Gideon Blackwell, the man who once outran his own shadow, dances with the woman who taught him how to stay. They move slow, gentle, and when the music swells, he pulls her closer and whispers, "I've never felt this alive." She leans into him. "That's because you're not surviving anymore. You're living." Back at home that night, as the stars stretch wide across the sky and Clara sleeps soundly against her favorite stuffed duck, Maybelle and Gideon sit on the porch steps, bare feet on the cool wood, wine glasses in hand. She sighs. "Do you ever miss it? The money, the chase, the fire, the ambition?" He thinks for a long moment. Then, no. She glances sideways. "Because back then, I was chasing things that didn't know how to love me back. And now," he wraps an arm around her, presses a kiss to her temple. "Now I'm sitting next to the only thing that ever did." She lays her head on his shoulder, and they watch the moon rise, not as an end, but as a reminder that some stories don't burn out. They grow roots. It's spring again. The kind of spring that doesn't ask for permission, just pushes up through the dirt and says, "I'm here now." The cottonwoods are blooming early. The creek, once wild with floodwater, now trickles lazy and clear. And in the field behind the Blackwells' house, Maybelle walks barefoot among the green, her skirts brushing against her knees, one hand pressed gently against her growing belly. She's 3 months along. Clara toddles nearby, wobbling in the grass, chasing a butterfly with both hands raised like she might catch the whole sky. Gideon stands on the porch, arms crossed, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Careful," he calls. "You'll lose her to that butterfly." Maybelle laughs without turning. "Let her try. That's how you raised her, remember?" "I wasn't chasing butterflies," he says, stepping down into the yard. "I was chasing a ghost. Then I found you." She turns to him, eyes full of sunlight. "You didn't find me, Gideon. We found each other." He cups her face gently, forehead resting against hers. "And now look," she whispers. "We're building again." He presses a kiss to her brow. They sit together beneath the old mesquite tree, the one that held the swing, the one that held him through storms and silence and silver that never mattered. Maybelle reaches into her satchel and pulls out a small packet of seeds. "What are those?" he asks. "Wildflowers." She opens the packet and pours some into his hand. "Tiny, unremarkable, dust and hope. I want Clara to grow up with color," she says. "Not just memories of brown grass and quiet houses. She already has color," he says, smiling. "You." They plant them together, one row for Clara, one row for the baby still growing, one for the life they never thought they'd get to have. When they finish, Maybelle leans into his side. "Do you think she'll remember this?" she asks, nodding toward Clara, who is now giggling at a beetle crawling across her boat. "No," Gideon says, watching her. "But she'll grow up inside it." That night, as thunder rumbles softly in the hills, not a storm, just a memory, Gideon takes the long way home from the barn. He walks the fence line. He checks the swing, and he stops by the grave under the cottonwoods. The one marked Elijah. He places a stone on top of the wood cross, not out of grief anymore, but out of love, the kind that remembers without drowning, the kind that holds space for what was lost and makes room for what still blooms. He whispers, "Your sister will know your name," and he means it. Years later, people still talk about that day in the desert. They say a man found a dying woman. Others say she saved him. They say there was a baby, that a storm came, that the richest man west of the Rockies walked away from silver and built a house with his bare hands, just to keep that baby warm. But the version that sticks is the one folks whisper near porch railings long after supper. When the stars are out and memory turns sweet, they say a widow and a girl with no home found their place beside a man who thought he'd buried his soul, and instead they gave it back to him. Clara is 5 now. She rides her pony with too much confidence and sings to the garden while picking weeds. She refuses to call weeds. She's clever like her mama, stubborn like her papa, and has an imagination wide as the prairie sky. She tells her little brother barely two and still learning how to throw rocks without hitting himself, stories about mountain lions and desert crossings and brave women with long braids and cowboys who never smile until they meet someone worth smiling for. She doesn't know those stories are real. She doesn't know they belong to her. Not yet, but she will. One day, she'll ask why the swing is carved from mesquite, why the tree has a stone at its roots, why her mama always smiles at rain. And when she does, Gideon and Maybelle will sit her down on the porch, hand in hand, and they'll tell her that her mama almost died in the Mojave sun, that her papa thought his heart had turned to stone, and that one baby and one choice to stop and care when no one else would rewrote everything. They'll tell her that love isn't loud, that it starts with water. With bread, with a name whispered into a quiet room, that love is a home you build, not a place you find, and that sometimes it's born in the desert, but it grows wild like flowers, where no one expected it to bloom.